The old man walked into the courtroom, wrists cuffed, his dark, lined face lowered. "State your name," the clerk asked. He answered quietly, voice trembling. "Elias Carter, Staff Sergeant, United States Marines." No one in the room could have guessed what was about to unfold. As the female judge glanced through his case file minutes later, her hand suddenly paused. Her skin turned pale. That name. It belonged to the man who had once carried her brother to safety on a battlefield in Fallujah, before vanishing into silence. Comment: respect, if you believe honor doesn't fade with poverty or age. Elias Carter, 69, sat slouched on the courtroom bench. His shoulders were swallowed by a weathered military coat, 2 sizes too big. Under the sterile courtroom lights, the creases in his face deepened, etched by decades of loss. Once, he wore dress blues with medals pinned to his chest. Now, he waited for judgment in second-hand clothes from a shelter. Case 47B, called the bailiff. City of Newbridge versus Elias Carter. Charges: disturbing the peace, trespassing, resisting arrest. He rose slowly, joints aching, worn down by time and untreated injuries. Vietnam first, then Iraq. Wounds visible and buried, carried without complaint across decades. "Mr. Carter," said the prosecutor, young and polished, his voice rehearsed. "He's been warned several times about lingering behind Jefferson Street Cafe. The owner filed 3 complaints just this month. But what he didn't say was this: Elias never begged, never asked for handouts. He just sat near the alley vent, trying to stay warm when the winter night closed in. Then came the officer's testimony. Found him behind the cafe at 11:45 p.m. Refused to vacate when ordered. Elias hadn't refused. He'd quietly asked for 5 more minutes, to finish half a sandwich a kind cook had slipped him. But back then, his words hadn't mattered. They still didn't now. "Your Honor," the prosecutor continued, "this is his 3rd citation this year. We recommend 30 days of community service and a no trespass order for downtown. Such an order would bar Elias from the 4th Street shelter, the only warm place he had left. It would shut him out from church meals. It would leave him alone, outside, during the coldest stretch of the year. Mr. Carter," Judge Olivia Parker finally addressed him, "do you have legal representation today?" He shook his head. His public defender had been pulled into another courtroom on urgent business. "Would you like to speak on your own behalf?" she asked, peering over her glasses. Elias cleared his throat. His voice came out low and rough. "No excuses, ma'am. Just needed to stay warm." "Why that location?" the judge pressed. Her expression unreadable, her tone edged with something more. He hesitated. "Jimmy, the cook, leaves food sometimes. Known him since he was a boy. His father served with me. Desert Storm." "And your service?" the judge asked again, breaking standard procedure. "United States Marine Corps," Elias said, straightening slightly. 1975 to 95. Staff Sergeant, 2nd Battalion, 8th Marines, Iraq. The words landed with weight, decades of buried pride finding breath for the first time in years. She made a quick mark on the file, then kept reading. Something deep in Elias Carter's military history gave her pause. Before she could say a word, the courtroom doors opened. A sharply dressed man in a tailored Navy suit strode in, walking with purpose. He reached the defense table, set down his briefcase, and faced the bench. "Your Honor, Alexander Ross. I've just been retained to represent Mr. Carter. I apologize for the abruptness." Elias turned, confused. He hadn't called a lawyer. Couldn't afford one, especially not a man wearing cufflinks and leather shoes. "This is highly unusual," Judge Parker said, watching him carefully. "The court was not informed of new representation." "It was a last-minute development," Ross replied, calm and composed. "I respectfully request a brief recess to speak with my client." Judge Parker studied them both. Her face gave nothing away. "This court will recess for 15 minutes, she said, rising and stepping briskly into her chambers. Elias leaned toward the stranger beside him. "I don't have the money for this," Ross replied softly. "You won't need it. My firm, Williams, Ross and Parker, is taking this on pro bono." Elias furrowed his brow at the name. "Parker, like the judge." "Exactly like the judge," Ross confirmed. Inside her office, Judge Olivia Parker pulled off her glasses, hands unsteady. 20 years on the bench had taught her control, but nothing had prepared her for this. It can't be the same man, she whispered, but the evidence was too precise. She opened a desk drawer and pulled out a weathered photograph, a younger version of herself, standing beside her brother, Lieutenant Jack Parker, in his Marine dress uniform. His arm rested proudly across her shoulders. They were smiling wide, full of hope at his commissioning. Beside the photo sat Jack's final letter from Iraq, the edges worn thin from years of quiet grief. In it, he'd written about a firefight outside Fallujah. His unit had been pinned down, but then came Staff Sergeant Quinn, charging into gunfire, dragging a wounded Marine to safety, covering the retreat as others pulled out the injured. If not for him, Jack had written, none of us would have survived. 2 weeks after that letter, Jack had been killed by an IED. Olivia remembered the funeral, the folded flag, her parents' silent heartbreak, and the Marine who approached afterward. Your son saved my life, he'd said. I was the one he carried. He never finished the sentence. He didn't need to. She had never forgotten his name, Mason Quinn. Years ago, she had tried to find him, hoping to hear more about Jack's final moments. But the military had informed her he'd redeployed almost immediately. Later, they said he'd been discharged with severe PTSD and a traumatic brain injury. Now, 2 decades later, he sat in her courtroom, a stranger to everyone but her. A knock broke the silence. Ross stepped inside, his face concerned. Olivia, what is this? He asked. As her late husband's former law partner and lifelong family friend, he was one of few who called her by name. It's him, Alex, she said, motioning to the photograph. The Marine who saved Jack, the one who carried him out of that ambush. Ross's expression shifted as realization sank in. The homeless veteran in your courtroom? Ross paused, his voice dropping. That's Elias Carter, the same man you've been trying to find for years. Olivia nodded slowly. His service record confirms it. Fallujah, 2004. Same unit as Jack. He was awarded the Silver Star for the exact engagement Jack described in his letters. Does he know who you are? I doubt it. I married Thomas after law school. Took his last name. Carter wouldn't recognize me now. It's been 20 years. She took a breath, trying to steady herself. How does a hero like that end up like this, Alex? How does someone who once saved lives wind up alone, on trial, just for trying to stay warm? Ross shook his head. In the short time we spoke, I got the sense he's endured more than most. Severe PTSD after his last deployment. His wife left while he was overseas. His benefits got caught in red tape. He did construction work for years until his injuries made it impossible. After that, job loss, eviction, and eventually, the streets. Olivia closed her eyes. Jack's voice echoed in her memory. Carter was the best of us. The kind of Marine who'd risk everything for his brothers. If I turn out half as good, I'll consider myself lucky. Ross spoke gently now. You could recuse yourself. No one would question it. No, she said firmly. I'm not letting this man disappear again. You know there are ethical risks. I do, she said, straightening. But there are ethical obligations too, especially to those who gave everything for this country. When Judge Parker returned to the courtroom, her posture was flawless, her voice steady, her face unreadable. But those who knew her well might have noticed her hands, the slight tremor as she adjusted her papers. Mr. Ross, she said formally, has your client made a decision? Ross rose smoothly. Yes, Your Honor. We're asking for dismissal of all charges. Mr. Carter wasn't trespassing. He was trying to survive a dangerous freeze. And we can demonstrate that restaurant employees gave him implied permission to be on the premises. The prosecutor opened his mouth to object, but Parker held up a hand. He fell silent. I have questions for the defendant, she said. Her focus turned to Elias. Mr. Carter, your military file lists Fallujah, 2004. Is that correct? Elias straightened, decades of instinct returning. Yes, ma'am. 2nd Battalion, 8th Marines. And on April 17th, were you part of an op near the western edge of the city? Confusion flickered across Elias's lined face. Yes, ma'am. We were escorting a supply convoy when we got ambushed. During that firefight, she pressed, did you rescue a wounded officer, Lieutenant Jack Parker, while under enemy fire? The courtroom stilled. Elias's eyes narrowed, the name sinking in. Memories stirred beneath the years. Parker, he said softly. Yes, young lieutenant. Brave. Took a hit trying to pull a wounded medic out of the line of fire. Elias's voice drifted into recollection. I reached him, dragged him behind cover. He kept shouting at me to go help the others instead. Told me to leave him behind. In the gallery, a silver-haired man in a Marine League jacket leaned forward. His attention sharpened. And what became of Lieutenant Parker? Judge Olivia asked, her expression composed, though everything beneath it trembled. We got him on the Bird, Elias answered softly. He made it to Germany, I heard. But a few weeks later, his convoy hit an IED. His voice caught. For years I've wondered if saving him only delayed the inevitable. Maybe I made it worse. Before anyone could respond, the silver-haired Marine in the gallery suddenly rose. That's him, he said loudly, pointing. That's Staff Sergeant Carter. I was there. He saved 6 of us that day. The room stirred. Judge Parker tapped her gavel once, firm, but missing its usual edge. Order, she said, though her voice didn't carry its typical weight. The courtroom settled into a tense hush. Elias kept his gaze low, clearly uncomfortable with the spotlight now bearing down on him. The older Marine didn't sit. Still standing, his voice was steady. Your Honor, he said. I don't mean to interrupt, but I was there. Carter took fire pulling that lieutenant out. The prosecutor stood. Your Honor, while Mr. Carter's military service is commendable, it's not relevant to these charges. Judge Parker cut in sharply. The court disagrees. It is deeply relevant. She placed her gavel down slowly. This court will recess for 10 minutes. She turned to the bailiff. Please see that Mr. Carter remains here. Then, just as she started to leave the bench, she paused. Something rare. Her eyes met Elias's. For the first time, really met him. Mr. Carter, she said softly, when I return, there are matters far beyond this case that we need to discuss. Inside her chambers, the judge finally let her guard drop. She pressed shaking fingers against her lips, as if containing 20 years of buried grief. Then, after a long breath, she picked up the phone. Colonel Matthews, it's Olivia Parker. Yes, I know it's been a long time, but I need a favor, and I need it urgently. Exactly 10 minutes later, she returned to the courtroom. She was not alone. 3 Marines followed behind her. A full colonel, a master sergeant, and a young corporal carrying a polished wooden case. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. At the sight of those uniforms, Elias stood instinctively, his joints stiff, but his posture proud. Muscle memory had overpowered the years. Judge Parker took her place, but instead of reaching for her glasses, she set them aside. For the first time in her judicial career, she addressed the courtroom not as a judge, but as a person. Before we proceed, she said clearly, I must share a personal connection to this case. She looked directly at Elias. The Lieutenant Jack Parker mentioned earlier. That was my brother. Gasps echoed across the room. Elias's brow furrowed, recognition flickering in his eyes. The tension in the room was thick enough to feel. 20 years ago, Olivia continued, my brother wrote home about a staff sergeant who saved his life in Fallujah. He said this man ran through enemy fire to reach him, after he was wounded, then covered the rest of his unit as they evacuated the wounded. Her voice held steady, but her eyes were wet. That man was Sergeant Elias Carter. From the gallery, the Marine from earlier stepped forward again. It's true, he said. I saw it with my own eyes. Carter took 2 rounds pulling that officer to safety. Judge Parker gave a small nod, then continued. 2 weeks later, my brother was killed in action. At his funeral, several Marines approached our family. They spoke of Jack's courage, but also of the man who had given us 2 extra weeks with him. Time we otherwise never would have had. Now she looked directly at Elias. After Jack's death, I tried to find you, but the Marine Corps said you'd redeployed. Years later, I learned you'd been discharged, but no one could tell me where you went. Elias stood silent, every emotion rising across his weathered face. I never stopped searching, she said. And now, whether by fate or something higher, you walk into my courtroom. She motioned to the colonel beside her. This is Colonel James Matthews, she said. He commanded my brother's unit. He has something to share. Matthews stepped to the bench. Staff Sergeant Carter, he began. The Marine Corps has been trying to locate you for quite some time. Your personnel file was one of thousands reviewed under the Veterans Reconsideration Initiative, he explained. New intelligence regarding your deployments in Iraq and Afghanistan warranted an update to both your commendations and your benefits. The corporal beside him opened the wooden case in his hands. Inside, a medal rested on deep blue velvet. By order of the Secretary of the Navy, the colonel announced, in recognition of extraordinary bravery on April 17, 2004. The Navy Cross is hereby awarded to Staff Sergeant Elias J. Carter, United States Marine Corps. Gasps echoed across the courtroom. The Navy Cross, the second highest honor after the Medal of Honor. Until recently, portions of your mission were classified, Colonel Matthews continued. But your actions that day didn't just save Lieutenant Parker and 5 Marines. They disrupted an ambush that could have wiped out the entire convoy. Your Silver Star has been formally upgraded, he finished. Elias's jaw clenched. For the first time, his composure cracked. There must be some mistake, he said quietly. I didn't do anything special. Just did my job. No mistake, Sergeant, the colonel replied, his voice resolute. And this is long overdue. From the gallery, a voice rang out with crisp authority. Attention on deck. The silver-haired Marine stood at full attention, and others followed. Veterans, former officers, even civilians who recognized the weight of sacrifice. One by one, they rose and saluted Elias Carter. Soon the entire room was on its feet. Even the prosecutor stood, caught between legal decorum and human decency. Judge Parker, no longer able to contain herself, wiped at her tears. Her voice shook as she spoke. In light of these extraordinary developments, all charges against Staff Sergeant Elias Carter are hereby dismissed. Permanently. She brought down the gavel with force. This courtroom is adjourned. As the room began to settle, the Master Sergeant approached Elias with a tablet in hand. Sir, we've been trying to find you to correct your VA records. Your disability rating has now been reassessed. 100% service-connected. Retroactive to your original discharge date. Elias blinked, stunned. What does that mean exactly? It means you're entitled to full back pay, sir. Complete medical coverage, housing assistance, educational benefits. Anything you need going forward. Ross stepped forward with purpose. Our firm will make sure every single piece of that is processed. No more delays. No more stonewalls. From the back of the courtroom, Jimmy, the cook who'd left sandwiches behind the cafe, stepped forward. His eyes brimmed with emotion. My dad used to tell me, Jimmy began. There was a Marine who saved his whole platoon. He said, if you ever meet a man named Elias Carter, you owe him everything. Jimmy reached out a hand, tears slipping free. I never knew that man was you. Not until today. The prosecutor, visibly moved, approached slowly. Sir, I had no idea. Please accept my sincerest apology for how this case was handled. Elias stood amid the rising room, his posture regaining its quiet power, as though decades of unspoken honor were finally being lifted, one breath at a time. Judge Parker stepped down from the bench. There was no distance now, no barrier between them. She stopped in front of him, her voice steady, but filled with meaning. My brother once told us what you said to him that day, she began softly. No Marine gets left behind, not while I'm still breathing. Today, Sergeant Carter, we finally keep that promise to you. 2 weeks later, Elias Carter stood before a mirror, adjusting to a life that still didn't feel real. He was inside a quiet apartment, part of a housing program built specifically for veterans like him. The walls were simple, bare, except for one frame, a display of his newly awarded Navy Cross, flanked by his long-lost Purple Hearts and service medals. Ross had tracked them down, recovered from a storage locker sold off years ago. A knock pulled him back. He opened the door to see Olivia Parker, not in robes, just herself, holding a small box. May I come in, Sergeant Carter? She asked. Just Elias is fine, he said with a humble smile. Then it's just Olivia, she replied, stepping inside. They sat across from each other in the modest living room, the quiet of their shared past, thick in the air. I brought something, Olivia said, opening the box. Inside, a bundle of worn letters, carefully tied. They're from Jack. He wrote us weekly while he was deployed. She handed one to Elias. This one mentions you. It's dated the day after you saved him. His hands trembled slightly as he unfolded it. Jack's handwriting, clear, sharp, just like he remembered. Mom, Dad, Elias read aloud. Don't worry about the news. I'm safe, thanks to one of our NCOs. Staff Sergeant Carter did something yesterday I still can't believe. When our unit was ambushed, he moved through enemy fire like it didn't exist. He refused to leave me. even when I ordered him to. Said no Marine gets left behind. Not on his watch. Elias's voice cracked. He mentioned you often, Olivia added quietly. Said you were the Marine he looked up to. He was a good officer, Elias said softly. Still young, but he cared about his people. That's rare. Olivia looked around the apartment. After Jack died, I went to law school, she said. The Veterans Court program, the housing initiative. It all started because of the things he wrote, about how the system forgets its own. Elias shifted uncomfortably. I'm not a hero, he said. I just did what needed to be done. That's exactly what heroes always say, Olivia replied with a quiet smile. She hesitated, then added, There's one more thing you should know. The day Jack died, he was leading a mission to track down insurgents targeting civilians. He volunteered for it. His final letter said he wanted to live up to the example you set. That sentence hit Elias harder than any battlefield wound. For 20 years he'd carried the weight of doubt, wondering if saving Jack had been a cruel delay, if his sacrifice had even mattered. He didn't die because of you, Olivia said gently, reading him like a book. He lived the way he did because of you. They sat in silence. Two lives woven together by service and sorrow. Outside, snow began to fall, soft and steady, covering the city in quiet white. Finally, Elias spoke, voice barely audible. For years, sleeping on sidewalks, I kept thinking no one remembered, like none of it mattered anymore. Olivia nodded. But it did, she said. To Jack, to every Marine you saved, and to me. As she stood to leave, she placed a hand on his shoulder. Jack used to say the measure of a Marine isn't what he does in front of a crowd. It's what he does when no one's watching. You lived that, she whispered. Even when the world forgot. Elias stood taller than he had in years, a quiet strength radiating from within. Someone remembered my name, he said softly. After all this time, someone remembered. In that single moment, something long broken began to heal. Not just in Elias Carter, but in every soul forgotten by the system they served. Some heroes save lives, then spend a lifetime waiting for someone to save theirs. But sometimes dignity doesn't need glory. Sometimes it just needs to be seen.